Hello, hello. Okay, so this works. Okay, this should be fine. Final tests. Does this work? Does this work? Do you know how to set up the feedback form? I cannot find it. Is it on Coda? Where is... Okay. Is it working? Uh... Hmm. What? Wait. What the fudge? Okay, wait, no. Shit. Okay, what is this? Edit. Oh, hi. There's people. Come on. Okay. 2 people? Okay, somehow 2 people. Okay. Just giving a few minutes for everyone to come in. I think there was some issue with how we had set up the link for AIS, the workshop. Okay, So just a few minutes and then we'll start. Alrighty, we have a few people. Okay. Okay. I'll just start up right now then. So, hello everyone. My name's Usaid Malik, and this is a workshop on genetic algorithms. So, first of all, who am I? I am a UTD junior, and I'm graduating May 2022. I've been an AIS tech coordinator for about 2 years now, and my main interests are in reinforcement learning and computer vision, but I've also dabbled with stuff like genetic algorithms, which I'll show to you here. Oh, okay. So this is the presentation timeline. So what I'm planning to do is this is just going to be a very general presentation. It's just supposed to be a generic introduction to genetic algorithms. It's not going to be much like heavy intensive coding or any sort of like down in the deep sort of presentation. This is more of just like a straightforward presentation on what genetic algorithms are with a corresponding visualization to go with them. So first we'll start with the introduction, then how they work, and then a visualization, and then finally some applications of these algorithms. So what are genetic algorithms in the first place? So in essence, what genetic algorithms are they are a smart way to brute force approaches to problems. So they're based on Darwin's theory of evolution. They fall under a classification of algorithms called evolutionary algorithms, and they are non-linear. What I'll show you what this means later on, but this essentially means that you can't use TensorFlow or PyTorch or any of the standard machine learning libraries on this. This is a very non-standard set of algorithms, and therefore the classical mathematical linear approach that most other machine learning algorithms use cannot be applied to genetic algorithms. And this also means, ironically, that they are also applicable to any problem. You can represent any problem as something that's not math, but you can't represent a not math problem as math to like kind of make it in basic terms. So this means that you can apply these genetic algorithms to basically anything, which makes sense when you think about it. All it is essentially a smart way to brute force. You can brute force anything, you can apply genetic algorithms to anything. So let's start with a basic example to kind of lead you into how genetic algorithms work. So here's a problem where we have a square and we want to choose the RGB values of the square to get a green square. So how would a brute force approach solve this? A brute force approach would try every single possible combination until it finds the correct one. So it'll go through red, green, blue, dark green, navy, whatever, and in the end it has to test 255 times 255 times 255 combinations, which is a lot of combinations. Over here I think it's like 16 million. And this is obviously super inefficient, so you want to do it in some smarter way. So what we do instead is we assign a score to each one. So let's assign the green, the one that we want, let's assign that a score of 100%. The red and the blue ones, the ones that we don't want whatsoever, let's classify them as 0%. These are the don't want scores. And then let's get a random sample of the squares and find their scores. So I created a random sample and I assigned these scores to them. These are not accurate scores actually, these are just like what I mentally thought the scores should be. Oh, it's cut off? Oh, okay. I'll fix this. I know what this is. This is a very... I know what this is. You see, I have a really high monitor resolution, and I forgot that that's not... Okay, so tell me, is this better? It should have readjusted. Give it a few seconds to see it on the screen. Okay. Okay, can you hear me? Everything else working out fine? Can we continue? Perfect. Okay. I'll keep going then. So yeah, so we choose a random sample of the squares and we try to find the scores. So here we have green, red, and so forth. And then from the sample we pick the best score square. So here let's pick the top three. So I pick dark green, green, and some version of blue green. So these are the best squares. Now we create new samples based on the top three. So we're creating a bunch of variations of these top three random squares we have found. And we've created a second sample, and a better sample. And then we repeat the process. We do it all over again. So you can kind of see how over time, as you keep doing these repetitions, you'll improve and you'll end up with a sample that's all of the perfect squares that you want. So that's basically what a genetic algorithm is. It's really straightforward, not a ton of complexity to it, which makes it a really nice algorithm. So let's redefine some terms to better fit the evolutionary thing about genetic algorithms. Apparently we really like being fancy. So let's call a square an object. It's pretty straightforward. Let's call the score of an object the fitness. So in what Darwin had, more fit objects are better. So the score is now the fitness. We want to be more fit. And the sample, let's call it the generation. So now we have a generation of objects that each have a fitness assigned to them. And so there's three main parts of every genetic algorithm. We have the fitness function, which is what assigns the initial scores. We have a selection method, which is what selects the best fit objects from a sample or a generation. And then we have a mutation method, which takes the selected objects and makes a new sample or new generation based off of them. So this is basic pseudocode for how it would work. You have an initial generation of objects. For each generation up to some limit, you calculate the fitness for every object in the generation. You select the objects from the generation using a selection method with a fitness calculation. And then you remove all non-select objects from the generation, the unfit ones, the ones you don't want to have. And then you refill the generation with a new mutated objects using a mutation method. And you're done. That's essentially what a genetic algorithm is at the pseudocode level. So what is the fitness function? What is it in essence? It's basically a measure of how good a combination of attributes are. So in our square example, it was a measure of how good RGB is. And the better the fitness, the better it is, and requires careful selection, however, to make sure improvement is possible. If you pick a bad fitness function, you sometimes end up with populations that or generations that don't improve and instead might stagnate or actually fall back. So you have to be a little careful. It's not too hard to pick a good fitness function, but you have to make sure you're not picking just some random number. That's not how it works. And, and then the selection method. This picks the most fit objects according to the fitness function from a sample. So you have multiple possible selection methods. So the first one, the one that we used, was k-best. So k-best is where you pick the top k, the best three objects from a generation sample. So here we picked the top three. It's the most straightforward, fastest improvement per generation. Every generation, you just cut off the bad ones. Just keep doing it over and over and over. However, there are some dangers to this. If you remove the unfit objects too fast, depending on your fitness function, this actually, if it's a little random, you can end up with a k-best that's stuck at a local maxima. It gets the best within a subset rather than the best within the entire population from all the possibilities. So what do I mean by this? Let's have an example. So let's say we have a generation here and dark green got really unlucky. Something happened to him. He fell on his head or something. So he got a 10. And then light green got unlucky too. He got a 5. And so then the reds, they excelled. They got 30s and 22s, blue, same thing, and so forth. So our fitness function, it wasn't able to be perfect. There was a little bit of randomness due to some situations in there. And then the result is, you look at the next generation, it's red, blue, and red. There's no green. So what would happen? The next generation, you would end up with more reds, more blues, and more reds. You will have no more greens in there because they have been cut off. And unless you get really lucky and somehow a mutation just jumps over and is able to catch on to that last little bit, you will always have reds and blues, and you won't improve. So obviously we don't want that. We don't want it to be where just one bad generation can ruin the entire thing. So we need to keep the unfit objects around just a little bit to make sure they're really bad. To make sure, like, okay, we really want to get rid of these guys ASAP. So how do we do this? How do we pick the best, but at the same time pick the worst a few times too? So the one way to do this is tournament selection, where we split the generation into subset tournaments and we pick the best from each one. So that means that the unlucky but good objects have a higher chance of making it to the next sample, because instead of competing with all the objects and some that were super lucky, they only have to compete with the ones that were right next to them. So in our generation example, the squares, we would have the greens competing against these competing against these three, and these competing against these three. So this green by itself would not be able to compete, right? It's lower than this and this and this. So K-Best would have cut out this green. However, because in tournament selection it's only competing against the purple and the yellow here, it's able to get through. And therefore we have the green in the population and we can improve. We can actually get somewhere. And then what about another method? Let's do roulette selection, where we randomly select objects from the prior generation using weighted probabilities by fitness. And then that means that if you're unlucky, but you're a good object, you have more chances to be unlucky. You can't be unlucky 10 times in a row, right? Not in computer science. That's not how it works. And so you spin the roulette wheel, and so you're like, okay, I want to pick the top. I want to pick three. I want to have three selected objects in this next generation. So what do? You spin the roulette wheel three times, and you just pick that object. Depending on the algorithm, some will replace the object, others would just like take it out of the pool and recalculate the fitness. But in general, we allow copying, and we just keep respinning the wheel and just taking whatever object from the prior generation that we want to move on to the next generation. Okay, so now mutation methods. So mutation methods generate new objects based on a set of selected ones. So they do all the mutations, the variations. They're the ones that actually do the improvement. Without them, all you'll end up doing is having a good selected number from a subset, and that's it. Now you want to explore a bit. So there's two methods to do this. We can do mutations or we can do crossover. So mutations randomly pick an attribute to modify by some small amount. So here we would pick, like, let's say we have green, and we would slightly change the different attributes and see what sticks around. So we'll have yellow, green, and dark green. All three of these objects, if this was the selected object from the first generation, all three of these mutations and the first object would all get passed on to the next generation. So it's kind of like you can see the parallels already with the theory of evolution, right? You have DNA and the chances of mutations in the different chromosomes. The, basically, genetic algorithms is trying to copy how the theory of evolution works and how DNA works. So the issue is if you have too high mutations, it's hard to converge. So if you end up changing everything so much every single time, the new generation is it's essentially an entirely new generation. So you want to make sure there's some semblance of attachment to the prior generation. And if there's too little mutations, it's slow to converge. This normally wouldn't be too bad of a thing, but as we'll see later, being slow in a genetic algorithm is really bad. So then crossover. So we had mutations, again, with how DNA works, right? We have mutations to chromosomes. Now let's do what parents do, right? You have a swapping between DNA, and then you have a new child, right? So that's how it works here. We swap two attributes between two objects. So we have 100, 0, 50, 50. Let's have 100 from one and 50 from the other. So you might add bad attributes if there's too many unfit kept from the prior generation, so you have to be careful about this, because as you remembered with the roulette selection and the tournament selection, we do want to keep bad objects. We want them to stick around a little bit. And so therefore, if you have high crossover and you have a roulette selection that happens to always land on keeping bad objects, the crossover could end up creating children where they just copy the bad attributes from their parents and they learn nothing good. So you want to make sure that you keep some bad attributes around. Man, talking about genetic algorithms makes me feel like I'm sort of terrible person. Okay, so let's do a visualization now. Um, Maybe I'll keep the link around. It's aisutd.github.o/genetic-algoviz. I might be able to also put this inside the chat. Oh, I have to sign in. That's unfortunate. Okay. Okay. Let me just directly put this in the chat. Where's live chat? Yeah, okay. Oh, man, you're ahead of me. Okay, you already did it. So here it is. So that's a link. Open it up. Yeah, so this is basic genetic algorithm visualization. Depending on your browser, it might look different to you. I'm sorry about that, but this was the so basically how this is working is we have like critters on the screen. So the objective of these critters, it depends on what you want. So you have this fitness function off to the side, and depending on what you want the fitness to be, it will end up improving different things. So, for example, I could choose critters eaten. I want the critters to eat each other more often. So I can do that as my fitness function and improve it. And so over time, what you should see is the critters will eat like anything that's a different species. I've set each species to a different color, and so it's just randomly generated. All the colors can be different. And then I have a visualization speed. If you set it too high, bad things happen. So if I want to show you what happens, yeah. So if you set it too high, bad things happen. If you set it really low, things are pretty stable. So I like to keep it around there. You can do the number of critters, the mutation percentage, which is like out of a new generation, how many do you want to be like actually new mutated children, and how many do you want to be from the prior generation. So here, as a default value, 25% are kept from the prior generation, and the rest are all new mutated critters. You have the mutation rate. So for every attribute, you go through and you randomly choose, okay, I want to modify this value. So there's a 50% chance by default that when it lands on it, when it goes through all the attributes, it modifies one. And then there's a mutation modifier for how much to change it. So what are the attributes for these critters? So there's four or five. I actually can't remember. So the first one is how much do they weigh getting to the closest food. So there's a distance to the closest food. How much do they want that? Then there is one for distance from the nearest enemy predator, because the larger critters are able to eat the smaller ones, so the smaller ones have to be careful. And then there's a third one for where is the closest critter that can eat you, that you can eat. So it's kind of the inverse of the other attribute. So as you can see here, what I've done for my attributes are they're not like actual like numerical values per se, they're tied to a function, right? So distance to the nearest food, distance to the nearest critter and stuff. They're not like X or Y or any sort of like static positions. They change dynamically based on where the other food is being added and where the other critters are added. And then finally you have the selection methods down below. So one thing I could show, like for example, critters eaten. So right now I have too slow a visualization speed. But over time, what you would see if you picked a bad fitness function, like fitness, like critters eaten, for example. If you pick a bad one, over time, they actually won't improve. Well, in this case, they actually wiped out themselves. They basically they ate each other, and then there was nothing left to eat because they don't eat food. They're so used to eating other critters. So they quickly kill off each other and they disappear. So this is if you pick a bad fitness function, this is what happens. If you pick food eaten instead, and you pick that. So over time, it should improve how often they eat food and how often um, they will like stay around longer. So you can see already, just from like the second generation, they already stick around much longer to eat food compared to the critters eat-in version. So I'm not going to keep this up too long. This is just like a visualization. You could feel free to mess around with it and just see what happens. Okay, so going back to the presentation, I hope you guys are still around for this, but so what are the pros and cons of genetic algorithms? So there are several pros. I've already stated a lot of these before, but just going through this again. So one pro is the fact that they are a version of a brute force. So that means they can be applied to anything, any sort of problem, any sort of situation where you can just like be a monkey and plug in random numbers. Genetic algorithms can suit your needs. They are a solution to your needs. And then they're also simple to code. So I have a few coding examples I can show later, but you can easily create a genetic algorithm within 50 lines if you wanted to, and it's really simple. So however, there are cons, and these are pretty significant for genetic algorithms. The first con, the worst one, is the fact that this is based off the theory of evolution, and the theory of evolution has us improving over like a millennia. But nature, like, it has eons, we don't. So it's very time consuming for us, like for this algorithm to actually reach a solution. And so that means that if you click the button and left it will take a while for it to find the optimal answer. So in theory, you could take a genetic algorithm. It's a brute force. You can apply it to any problem. You can take genetic algorithm and say, okay, make a human out of a bunch of cells. So eventually, it'll figure out how to make a human. The only thing is, it'll take a millennia, and by that time, it's like, okay, well, I might as well have done it myself. And the other con to it is the fact it's non-linear. That means there's no easy math to boost. So a lot of the benefits to it are actually also detractors. So what do I mean by no easy math and no gradient descent? So first of all, no TensorFlow and no PyTorch. So you can't really use the GPU for those quick math calculations that other machine learning algorithms can do. You're kind of stuck to what you have. And gradient descent is what all these machine learning algorithms use. They have an equation that they can optimize where they get the derivative of like some cost function and they basically just keep shifting it down until they hit the optimal value or the minimum possible cost function. You can't do that for a genetic algorithm. There's no actual equation in the backend for this. There's no like neural network weights, no linear regression. There's none of that. It's just basically splitting around an array. Since it's just splitting around a array, it's non-linear, and you can't create a derivative out of that. So what happens is you end up being unable to use gradient descent or any sort of mathematical optimization. In other words, for a genetic algorithm, what we have right now is kind of what we will have. There's really not much improvement you can make to this field. You can use it for anything, but you can't really improve it much besides changing some selection methods or changing some mutation methods, although there has been some improvement on what mutation methods we use. So how are genetic algorithms used even with all these cons and pros? So the one big area they're being used now is hyperparameter tuning, where hyperparameters are the parameters and settings provided to a machine learning model. And the objective is to find the best possible set of parameters for a machine learning model to accomplish a task. So if we had, for example, a model to identify numbers, so the objective would be to find the set of parameters for that machine learning model to have the highest possible accuracy of identifying numbers. The main reason why genetic algorithms are good for this is because the relationship between different parameters is nonlinear. This seems initially not to make much sense since the machine learning model that you're using is linear, right? It's some version of TensorFlow or PyTorch or some other gradient-based algorithm. However, like you can find that small changes in parameters have very big changes across like the entire model, and therefore it's not a very easy relationship to map out. This is where genetic algorithms have an advantage. They can quickly find good parameters and find small optimizations for them. And since genetic algorithms take forever to find a solution, and machine learning algorithms take forever to train, you can do the best of both worlds. You can do stuff where you can prune a machine learning model and be like, okay, it's not doing as good as what I have already. Let's just quickly cut off. We can do something like, let's just quickly cut off this run and move forward to another run. And then the relationship between parameters is nonlinear. Another possible usage of genetic algorithms is neuroevolution, which is finding the best possible neural network for a task. So we can do stuff like finding the smallest possible neural network or finding the most accurate neural network and finding ways to fit it on things like IoT devices which have low memory. So here as a picture I have like a Google Coral GPU which is used for tiny IoT devices. The Coral GPU does not have much memory. It has I think at most like like a gigabyte or so, which is for a lot of machine learning models that's way too small. So with neuroevolution, you basically find variations of neural networks and find the smallest possible one, and you can find a version that maybe could fit onto this tiny little GPU. Another thing you can do with neuroevolution is besides reducing the size of the neural networks, you can also decrease the computational needs. So you can find shortcuts in the neural network. You can say, okay, this input's not needed to this node. This is not needed for this node. And so you can really streamline a neural network that way. The only thing is that again, this takes time. Genetic algorithms are, in general, a very time intensive algorithm, and therefore you have to be very careful with how you tune the genetic algorithm and make sure to pick a very good fitness function so that way it can improve as quickly as possible. So here's where I'll say questions. There is a feedback form I have. If I could just quickly paste it. Oh. And also what I'll do actually is I'll show you guys since we have some spare time, I will show you guys some example code for a genetic algorithm workshop. So let me just paste this into the live chat. It's just a Colab notebook. You can look at it. This is actually implementing the squares example that I showed in the workshop. So we would code the square color genetic algorithm where we're finding the best color square. So what I've done is I have a random library and then a class for squares. So this class is just the object. It just stores like, okay, what's the square's fitness? What are its current values? Nothing much. But what I really wanted to show is how many generations it takes for these genetic algorithms to work out. So let's say I did 10 generations. So it will quickly go through, and this is kind of an output of the average RGB values per generation. So this time it picked 0, 2. So it quickly found it within 10 generations. That's great. Let's try adding a little bit more variation. Right now it's pretty small. Let's add more mutations per attribute. And let's reduce the size per generation. Actually, that's the best way. So if we reduce the number of squares per generation and try it again. Oh wow. Okay, this time my genetic algorithm is working a lot better than it usually does. Usually it takes much longer. But here we can see that it's nowhere as good as before. And if we increase the number of generations to say 1000, it ran it. So it will go through and it finds a solution, but you can see it's actually not that good. So what I had the first like 10 generations run, that was super lucky. But here you can see that the the target color that what I want is 02550. So I want it to be green. However, when I look down here, I end up with 72417 7 or 3. So this is not the number I want. I want 255 in the middle and 0 on both sides. But it takes a long time for these genetic algorithms to actually stumble upon the right answer. So if I took this again and ran at 10,000, it will take a while and it will just keep printing through. But what you'll see is that it has a very low chance of actually finding the correct answer until it has gone through so many combinations. So here it actually performed worse. It got unlucky. It got 1, 236, 1 again. So it's getting there. It's getting very close to the optimal solution, but because I guess I have a bad fitness function, it's not able to hit it. So I could do this over and over. I could run this for 100,000. Interestingly, when I had 10, and if I increase the number per generation to, let's say, 100, it will hit it much quicker. Yeah, so within 100, 0, 2, 226, 0. So it's already almost there. And the main reason for this is when you have a higher number per generation, you've created more possible variations from a sample that it can quickly cut down instead of going through all these different mutation steps. So actually what you want for a genetic algorithm is you want to have as many possible objects per generation. So you can play with this too. This is a Colab notebook. You can mess around with it. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I can just quickly answer it here. And then this is a feedback form that I'll also paste in the chat. If you could please fill that out, that would be helpful for us. Yeah. Any questions? This went a little shorter than I think I would have wished, but I hope that it was useful. I hope it was a good presentation. Oh yeah, I forgot. There's a prize if you fill out the event feedback form. I think it's a chance to win a $20 Amazon gift card. Feel free to correct me. Yeah, you'll have to put in your email. Okay, so I got asked how would you choose the best fitness function? So honestly, it really comes down to what is your goal. One nice thing about genetic algorithms is that because they're so adaptable, you can usually you can just apply a fitness function and see its results. If it doesn't improve, then you can be like, okay, it's probably the fitness function or your selection method. There's two different issues with it. So if you try different selection methods and it doesn't work out, then you know it must be your fitness function and you have to vary it. But honestly, it's trial and error. The main thing with genetic algorithms is partially due to their simplicity and the fact they're non-linear. Um, they can be applied to anything, which means they can be applied to any fitness function. So to find a good fitness function, I would say the least amount of randomness that possible. Less randomness, the better. And you want to make sure that there's a high differentiation between bad and good. So you don't want it to be on a really compressed time scale, like it's between 0 and 1. You would want it to be in it between instead like 0 and 1,000. You want there to be very big variation between the different objects, so it's able to more easily pick a good object to do. Another thing I would say is, depending on your fitness function, like in my visualization, I have it running for a generation for a set number of timestamps or until 1 or 0 critters are left. So what you can do instead is have it evaluate for longer as your fitness function. So instead of running each individual once and calculating the fitness, you could run it for like 5 times or 10 times and use that instead. So that would let you get rid of the need for roulette selection and tournament selection and all these different random ones, because you have a higher chance of knowing from the get-go that, okay, this is the best individual, I'm going to pick you. Does that answer the question? Yeah, so just one thing, just interesting thing to notice, like we have this visualization that I have going here. So since I've selected critters eaten, what you would see is every generation, they just immediately eat whatever mutated critters they find that happen to be a different species, that are different, like too different of a color. And so if we look at the overall fitness function, we see it's actually like 0.05, 0.05, and so forth. It's very low. And the reason is because like every generation, like, all the mutated critters are just getting eaten up. So it's impossible for there to be any variation. This is a very unique fitness function, but this kind of shows like if you pick a really bad fitness function where you don't think about the consequences of the interaction between objects, if you're doing it that way, you'll end up with a stagnant population. So no matter what happens from now on, it will probably stay purple, just because every time there's a new mutation, a different species, they immediately get killed off by the other critters. So you could say technically it's reached the end goal, but if you try other, like if you do multiple runs with this set, you'll find that maybe a different color comes out on top. It's not anything about particular attributes, it's just being able to very quickly kill off their fellow species, fellow kind. Any other questions? Okay, how many people are here? It's 4 people, 5 people. Are you fine saying the workshop is over? I think the workshop's over at this point. Thanks everyone who stuck around. Please fill out the feedback form, and hope to see you guys at the next AIS workshop. And remember to join the Discord. So